Hello, hello, hello everyone. Today we're going to paint this gorgeous gold and blue dot mandala. This is a very easy dot painting tutorial designed for beginners, and I promise you that when you're finished, this mandala is going to be absolutely stunning. I'm going to show you basic dotting, and also I'm going to teach you to do some of the fancier paint dotting designs, like creating teardrops and comma swooshes, and also how to add layered dots, or what we call top dots. I'm going to be painting on two different canvases because I want to show you how versatile this design is, and also I want to give you good close-ups, which is much easier to capture on a flat surface. So I'm going to refer to each of these pieces as the disc and the dome. Here's my recipe. You can pause here to gather what you need, or just refer to the list in the description area below this video. So get all your goodies together and let's go make the magic happen as we paint with a passion. This dome is a styrofoam half sphere, which is a lot like painting on a rock, except it's much lighter, which means you really have to hold on to it. The painting surface measures 7 inches, and I'm sanding off this raised logo with a nail buffer real quick before we begin. Now this clip is a little out of order, but I want to take a second to show you some of the tools I'm going to use before we get going. First, I'm using earthquake putty to hold the dome from the bottom. Because it's so light, it doesn't sink into my hand like a rock would. And this is a great way to hang on to it from the bottom without touching the sides where I need to paint. And the second thing I want to show you is my dotting tool size guide. It makes it really easy to determine the tool size that you want to use, and there's a link in the description area below this video if you're interested in making your own. I'm going to reference my dotting tools by number. So S1 is the smallest of the small dotting tools, and those go up to a number 5. And then L6 is the largest of my large tools that I'm going to use. And that goes down to obviously number 1. Alright, so back to prepping our dome. I'm priming it with gesso, and I'm using a sponge brush. And then I'm going to do the same to the disc, which is a 6-inch wood cutout. Now, let's paint the background black. See how handy that earthquake putty is? It's pretty nifty, right? Next, if you're not using a glossy black paint, I recommend you varnish over your black paint before you begin dot painting. This is a great trick that will help to deliver smooth, round dots, and it'll keep your dots from bleeding into the base paint. Now let's add some markers. I like to use stencil guides to find the center of my canvas whenever possible because it just makes it so easy. In this case, placing the stencil on top of the dome doesn't really work very well. So I'm using the stencil on the bottom and then just lining up my measuring tape to mark across and chalk in the center. Next, let's trace in the center of the stencil and each of the markers all the way around, up to the first tick. And you can add as many as you like. My stencil, this circle is 2 inches wide and it has 16 markers. All right, let's get to dotting. Using my L6, which is the 6th biggest large dotting tool, I'm going to add a center dot of dark blue sapphire. When you're dotting with metallic paint, it tends to be a little elasticy, so I recommend that you go slowly and make sure there's no tail of paint coming off the tool, both before you place the dot and then before you remove the tool from placing the dot. Sometimes you might need to smooth the paint out when you're using a large dotting tool, and you can either use the tool you have in hand, or you could even use a small metal dotting tool to just kind of push the paint into place. All right, let's add some swooshes, or teardrops, or sometimes they're called dot tails. First, let's take a quick look at what we're going to do, and then we'll take a close-up look. Alternating colors, we're going to add tails all around the center dot. And I'm sure there's many different ways to do this, but this is what works for me every time. Let's add the shorter swooshes first. And I'm going to use my S3 for this. Load your tool and place a dot at the starting point. Now reload your tool and add a little more paint to that dot. Maybe do it 1 or 2 times. And I like to dab my tool a few times before I move away to make sure it has released the paint. Now switch to your S1 pin tool and grab the paint and drag a straight line towards the center. And as you drag, lighten up the pressure as you bring it to a point. And now shape the tail into a teardrop by dragging the paint around the sides of that line you just made, bringing it back down to the point, easing up on the pressure as you get to the end. And try not to touch or drag the tool on the surface. You're basically pushing and pulling the paint into place. And let's repeat this on every other line. Make sure your starting point is the same distance away from the center dot for each swoosh. And now using my S5 tool, I'm going to set the starting dots a little further away, and the S5 is going to add a little more paint, so it's going to spread further. And then we just go all the way around. And take your time and just make sure the tool has released all of the paint before you move it away. If you do end up with paint where you don't want it, or a dot that you don't like, just use the silicone end of your tool to remove it, or even a damp cotton swab. That'll work really great. Okay, let's add our first 2 rows of base dots. Let's place the first row close to the short tails. And I'm using my L4 with Festive Green for this. Just plant your dot and then dab it more than once if you see the paint refusing to let go. And pause for a second, and that'll allow the paint to settle into place before you move on. This usually only happens to me with metallic paints. And the second row goes in between the first row of dots, and it's just slightly offset a little bit lower, close to the longer tails. And when you're dotting with large flat tools, it's best not to press the tool against the canvas. That can leave sort of a gap without paint when you lift off. So instead, lightly dab the paint on without touching the tool all the way down. Now, let's go up a tool size and add 2 more rows. And when you're dot painting on a ball shape or a rounded shape, it's important to try to keep the paint from dripping after you've placed your dots. So if this starts to happen, let the paint rest for a minute before continuing, and you can prop it up on something so that the dots are sort of laying flat until they set enough that they won't run. Okay, let's add some swooshes in a fan shape. As I switch between the dome and the disc clips, things might look a little out of order because I painted them both in a slightly different order, but don't worry, we won't skip any steps, I promise. Place a dot in between your last green row of dots, and this dot will sort of be your tail target. Load your tool and place a dot at the starting point. Now reload your tool and add a little more paint to that dot. Maybe do it 1 or 2 times. Now switch to your S1 pin tool and grab the paint and drag a straight line towards the center. Now place a smaller dot on each side of the main tail, just slightly offset, and then grab your S1 tool and drag the paint into a comma shape, curving it in towards the center of the swoosh. And just make sure the end of the comma tail lines that they line up with the center tail. Now just add a small dot on each side of each comma, and voila! How cool is this? Okay, so make sure your dots are set and dry, and then let's add some top dots. Move down 1 tool size and carefully add a dot right in the center of the green dots. Make sure your dots are set and dry, and then let's add the next set of top dots. This time, move down 2 tool sizes and carefully add a dot at the top center edge of the last dot. And I'm using a little fan to speed up the drying time. If you are painting on styrofoam, make sure not to set the fan too high or your piece might just end up on the other side of the room because it's very lightweight. And don't ask me how I know this, but I know this. And now let's take a closer look. If you're painting on a dome and you need to hold on to the top, make sure that center dot is dry and completely set before you grab onto it. And remember, try not to touch the tool to the surface. This is going to leave you a cleaner dot. And let's move down a tool size and repeat with dark blue. Okay, it's time to fill in all the black blank space. I'm using my S2 tool and I'm just randomly placing dots throughout the black space. You can fill in as much or as little as you like. I'm going to show you both and you can decide what you like best. Now it's really easy to get locked into one spot and overdo it. So I recommend you keep moving on and then just come back to any area that looks sparse. 2 of my biggest rules for dot painting are: 1, clean off the dotting tool tip often before the paint starts to clump. And the second one is to make sure to keep the paint fresh. So I always pour small amounts of paint at a time, and that way I don't waste it. And I always pour new paint if it starts to get dry or gummy in the palette. I always keep a towel handy, and that way I can wipe off the tips of my tools easily. And I just have a bag of old cut up white t-shirts and some old kitchen towel rejects. And I'm using less filler dots on the dome just to show you the difference. I decided to add black top dots to the teardrops on the disc because I felt like the gold needed to be broken up a bit, and I think this adds some nice balance. And using one of my smallest dotting tools, I'm adding one final top black dot on both pieces. And I'm going to dot over the center dot of the dome just because I handled it so much. Much better. Okay, so before you varnish, I recommend you let the paint set for at least a few days. Also, make sure to erase any visible chalk lines. For the dome, let's use a medium flat brush to apply a generous coat of varnish. And for the disc, well, I'm always talking about my favorite way to varnish flat surfaces, and here it is, using a foam roller. And just remember, your varnish's finish will be the finish for everything. So if you paint with shiny high gloss paint and then cover it in a matte varnish, your paint is now going to have a matte finish, and vice versa. And here we have it, folks, the Gold and Blue Mandala Duo. I think they both came out absolutely beautiful. Wow, stunning! Thank you all for joining me today, and a warm welcome to all of my new subscribers. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you next time to Paint with a Passion. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. I wish you peace, love, and happiness now and always. Bye!